If someone told me a year ago that I would die, meet Jesus, and return with a message that would shake me to my core, I would have laughed. But then it happened. One moment I was driving home, thinking about nothing more than picking up groceries for my wife. The next, I was floating above my own body, watching paramedics fight to bring me back. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was what I saw next. A vision of the future, our future, a world deceived, a choice that couldn't be undone. A moment when the door would close forever. Jesus showed me everything. And now I have to show you, because what I saw is coming soon. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but after what happened to me on February 3rd, 2024, I can't keep silent. My name is Daniel Brooks, and I live in Austin, Texas. I was an ordinary man, a husband, a father, and a man of routine. I woke up every morning at 6 a.m., kissed my wife, Claire, before heading off to work, and came home in time for dinner. Life was simple, predictable. I never expected that one normal evening would be my last. It was a Friday. The air had a crisp chill, unusual for Texas. I had spent the entire day drowning in spreadsheets at my corporate finance job, feeling more exhausted than usual. The sky had turned a murky gray by the time I left the office, and as I stepped outside, the first drops of rain splattered against my windshield. Before heading home, I called Claire. "Can you grab some eggs on the way?" she asked. "Of course," I replied. It was just another routine stop, another small moment in an ordinary life. I took the usual route down Interstate 35, my hands gripping the wheel as the rain picked up, heavy and relentless. The wiper struggled against the downpour. My headlights reflected off the wet pavement, blurring the world into streaks of silver and black. I wasn't speeding. I wasn't distracted. I was just driving home. But then, blinding headlights, a massive truck skidding out of control. I had no time to react, no time to think. Everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was floating. At first, there was nothing. No pain, no cold, no sense of my body at all. Just an overwhelming stillness. And then I saw it. My car, a crumpled wreck of twisted metal. The truck driver had stumbled out, clutching his head in shock. Paramedics rushed to my side, their voices frantic, trying to revive me. I should have been afraid. I should have been desperate to return to my body. But instead, a deep peace wrapped around me, unlike anything I had ever known. Then I felt it. A pull. I turned, and there it was, a tunnel. But this wasn't just darkness or empty space. It was alive. A golden passage, shimmering, moving as though it had its own heartbeat. It wasn't calling me by force. It was welcoming me. I stepped forward, and the moment I did, the world behind me, the wreck, the sirens, the rain, vanished. There was only the light. And at the end of it, a figure stood waiting. I couldn't see his face at first. The radiance around him was too strong, too overwhelming, but I knew, my soul knew. It was him. And the moment I realized it, everything changed. The moment I realized who stood before me, my entire being trembled. Not out of fear, but from something far greater. Awe, love, power, everything at once. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I could only stand there, overwhelmed by the radiance before me. The figure stepped forward, and as he did, the brilliance softened just enough for me to see him. Jesus. His eyes locked onto mine, and in that instant, I felt completely known. Every flaw, every failure, every regret I had ever carried was laid bare before him, and yet there was no condemnation, no judgment, only love. A love deeper and stronger than anything I had ever experienced in my life. Then he spoke. Not in words that passed through the air, but directly into my soul. Daniel. The way he said my name, like he had known me before I was even born, like he had waited for this moment. Tears welled in my eyes. Am I dead? My own voice felt small, weak compared to the presence surrounding me. He nodded, but there was no sorrow in his face, only purpose. You were given these moments beyond death because you must see, and you must tell them. Tell them what? Before I could ask, the light around us shifted, and suddenly, we were somewhere else. I found myself standing in the middle of a city, modern, familiar, yet eerily different. The streets stretched wide, buildings sleek and towering. People walked by, going about their day, yet something was off. Their expressions were blank, their movements robotic. A woman entered a cafe, and instead of paying with cash or a card, she waved her hand over a scanner. A faint glow pulsed beneath her skin. It looked so normal, so convenient, but something deep in my spirit recoiled. Jesus stood beside me, his gaze sorrowful. This is what comes before the deception. I turned to him, confusion tightening in my chest. Deception? He gestured forward, and suddenly the scene shifted again. Now I stood in an immense conference hall. Screens lined the walls, displaying the faces of world leaders, scientists, and influential figures. A man stood at the podium, his presence commanding yet unnervingly calm. I couldn't recognize him, but I could feel it. The weight of his authority, the pull of his words. Behind him, the screen displayed the date, March 2025. The man smiled, spreading his arms as he spoke. His voice was smooth, persuasive. We have found the ultimate solution for security, for health, for prosperity. This is the future. Then I saw it. The same mark, the same faint glow beneath the skin. But now, it wasn't just for payments. It was for everything. Identification, access, survival. Jesus placed a hand on my shoulder. This is the moment of deception. I wanted to shout, to warn the people in the room, but they couldn't hear me. They didn't want to hear me. They were clapping, smiling, welcoming it. And then, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A man stood in line, hesitant. He held his wife's hand, their children clinging to their sides. They had resisted for as long as they could, but they were starving, cut off from work, from food, from everything. His hands shook as he stepped forward. The official smiled at him, reassuring. And then, with trembling fingers, he accepted the mark. The moment it was placed beneath his skin, I saw something dark enter him. It wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. No screams, no agony. Just a quiet shift, a separation. His wife looked up at him, and in that instant I knew she could see it too. Jesus turned to me, grief in his eyes. They will not even realize what they have lost. I turned to Jesus, my heart pounding. They don't see it, I whispered. They don't even know what's happening to them. Jesus nodded, his face sorrowful. The greatest deception is the one that does not look like deception at all. The scene before me continued unfolding. More people lined up, eager to receive the mark, smiling as if they had been given the key to a better life. They scanned their glowing hands to enter buildings, access services, buy food. It was all so easy, so normal. But deep inside, I felt sick. I saw pastors standing at pulpits, reassuring their congregations. "This is not the mark of the beast," they said. "It's just technology. It makes life easier. God understands." Their words were calm, logical, soothing. But Jesus shook his head. "Yes, even my people will be deceived." Then the vision shifted again. I saw a man trying to resist. His wife and children sat in their home, their cupboards empty. His employer had refused to let him work without the mark. His bank account was frozen. His children's eyes were hollow with hunger. I watched as he struggled, as he wept, as he held his wife's trembling hands. Then, with a single decision, he stepped forward and took the mark. And just like before, I saw it happen. A shift, a darkness slipping in, subtle, quiet, unnoticed. Jesus turned to me. "The enemy does not take their faith. He weakens it, little by little, until they no longer hear my voice." I swallowed hard. But people wouldn't just accept this, would they? Jesus' expression was solemn. "It does not happen overnight. It begins with small conveniences, small compromises. The enemy does not need to force them. He only needs them to choose comfort over truth." The scene changed again, and now I saw churches divided. Half of the congregation had embraced the new system. The other half resisted, but those who resisted were mocked, ostracized, labeled as extremists. Families were being torn apart. I saw a woman pleading with her teenage son. He had just received his first digital upgrade, and she could already sense something was different. His responses were mechanical, distant. His warmth was gone. "Please," she whispered, reaching for him, "don't do this." He sighed, rolling his eyes. "Mom, everyone is doing it. You're stuck in the past." I saw a husband and wife arguing. "I can't stay with you if you won't take it," the husband said. His wife's eyes filled with tears, but she shook her head. "I'd rather lose you than lose my soul." Then I saw the next step in the plan. It started with exclusion. Those who refused the mark were denied services, access, jobs. But then it escalated. People who resisted disappeared. Some were arrested for spreading misinformation. Others simply vanished overnight. Churches that refused to comply were shut down. Their members were labeled as threats to progress. The world embraced false peace, and Jesus whispered, "This is the trap." Then the vision shifted again. I saw the real battle, the one happening in the spiritual realm. Dark waves moved over cities, unseen by human eyes, but I could see them. They were everywhere, influencing everything. I saw people still going to church, still singing worship songs, but something was different. Their prayers were weak, their hearts empty. They didn't even realize it. I saw pastors losing their fire, their messages watered down. Jesus turned to me, his voice filled with sorrow. "The enemy does not need to make them reject me. He only needs to make them indifferent." Then I saw something even worse, a great event. The world trembled, a crisis unlike anything before. Natural disasters, economic collapse. Fear consumed the nations. Governments scrambled to respond. Leaders gathered in secret meetings. And then, one man stepped forward. He was calm, charismatic, intelligent. He had all the answers. People looked to him as a savior. He promised peace, stability, unity, and under his leadership, a new global system was introduced. At first it was voluntary, then it became necessary. Jesus turned to me, his voice urgent. He will not come with force, he will come with solutions. And the world would welcome him. The world embraced the new system without hesitation. People hailed the leader as a genius, a man of peace who had solved humanity's greatest crises. His voice carried across every screen, calm and reassuring. This is not about control, he said. This is about unity. And the world believed him. The mark, once just a tool of convenience, became a requirement. At first it was needed for work, then for travel, then for healthcare. Then it was required for everything. I saw people who once resisted finally give in, not because they were forced, but because life without it became impossible. Those who refused were locked out of society. They couldn't buy food, couldn't see a doctor, couldn't enter buildings. They became outcasts in their own world. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A young father stood outside a grocery store, his wife and child beside him. The boy was crying, his little stomach empty. His mother wiped her tears, looking to her husband in desperation. The man clenched his fists. He had resisted for so long, but now his child was starving. He walked into the store, stepped up to the counter, and held out his hand. The scanner beeped as the mark was placed beneath his skin. I watched as the moment it happened, something changed in him. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. There were no screams, no visible signs of torment. But I saw it. A separation, a severing. His soul had shifted, and he didn't even realize it. Jesus turned to me, grief in his eyes. They will not even know what they have lost. Tears streamed down my face. But can't they undo it? Can't they turn back? Jesus looked at me with deep sorrow. Once they choose, their hearts will no longer hear me. I felt my knees weaken. The choice was permanent. I looked around. More people were accepting the mark. Some hesitated, but hunger, fear, and exhaustion always won. One by one, they stepped forward. And one by one, I saw the same separation take place. Then I saw the others, the ones who had refused. They were hiding. In forests, in abandoned homes, in underground places. Their numbers were few, but their faith was like fire. I saw a woman praying over an empty bowl, and food appeared. I saw a man walk unnoticed past security checkpoints because the system could not see him. Miracles surrounded them, and Jesus whispered, "The world will call them weak, but in my kingdom, they are the strongest." And as the world tightened its grip, these few remained, untouched, unafraid, unbroken. The world had changed. The system had taken full control. Those who accepted the mark lived in a society that was perfect on the surface. No poverty, no war, no suffering. Everything was efficient, organized, controlled. But something was missing. I saw it in their eyes. They were hollow. They smiled, they laughed, they continued with their daily lives, but their souls had dimmed. They no longer longed for God. They no longer needed Him. Jesus turned to me, his expression heavy. The enemy does not need to make them hate me. He only needs to make them forget me. Then I saw the others, those who had refused the mark. They were few, scattered across the land, living in secret, but they were not alone. I saw them gathering in hidden places, old barns, abandoned homes, deep forests. No technology, no access to the world system, but their faith was alive. A young girl, no older than 10, knelt in prayer. Her voice was soft, but as she spoke, I felt power move through the air. Beside her, a man placed his hands on an injured boy. The child had a deep wound, blood staining his tattered clothes. They had no hospitals, no medicine. But the man closed his eyes, whispered a prayer, and the wound vanished. Healing, provision, miracles. Where the world had cut them off, God sustained them. Jesus turned to me. I will protect my own in ways the world cannot understand. I watched in awe. Soldiers searched for them, tracking devices scanning for unmarked individuals. But when the soldiers passed right by them, they saw nothing. It was as if they were invisible. One group huddled in an abandoned building, hands clasped in prayer. Footsteps echoed outside, voices calling for their surrender. A soldier stepped forward, gun raised. And then, he froze. His face twisted in confusion. He turned to his men. Where did they go? But the believers had not moved. They were still there. Jesus whispered, I will blind the eyes of the enemy. The soldiers turned away, leaving as if they had never seen them at all. I saw another man, alone, walking through a city that rejected him. Digital scanners lined the streets, searching for those without the mark. But when he passed beneath them, nothing happened. They did not see him. The world thought they were weak, but they were untouchable. Jesus' voice was firm. Tell them not to be afraid. I turned to him, my heart aching. But what about the others? The ones who took the mark? Is there no hope? His expression darkened. They made their choice. Then he pointed, and I saw the final event. A moment that would change everything. And I knew time was running out. The sky darkened. A deep rumbling echoed across the world. I felt it before I saw it. The shift, like the very earth itself was holding its breath. Then it happened. A great event. A moment that shook the foundations of civilization. I saw nations trembling, governments collapsing, banks shutting down overnight, people screaming in the streets, their digital accounts frozen. Everything they had depended on, gone in an instant. I saw natural disasters strike without warning, floods swallowing entire cities, earthquakes ripping through nations, fire falling from the sky. Fear spread like wildfire. People turned on their screens, desperate for answers. The world leader appeared, his face calm as ever. He had a solution. This is the moment we have prepared for, he assured them. A new world is coming. One of peace, one of unity, but we must move forward as one. And then he announced the final phase of the system. No longer was the mark just about convenience. No longer was it just a tool. It became a declaration of allegiance, a choice, one that could never be undone. Jesus turned to me, his voice solemn. This is the final push. I saw pastors standing before their congregations, pleading with their people. Some saw the truth and refused to comply. Others wavered, hesitating at the edge of deception. And then there were those who stood behind the pulpit, assuring their flocks, this is not the mark of the beast. God would want us to be wise, to adapt. And people listened. I saw one man, faithful his whole life, step forward to take the mark. The moment it touched his skin, his soul changed. Not violently, not with screams or torment. Just a quiet loss. A severing so subtle he never even noticed. Jesus turned to me, grief deep in his eyes. Only those who are rooted in me will see the truth. Everyone else will follow the lie. I saw families divided. A woman begged her husband, please don't do this. He shook his head, laughing softly. You're being dramatic. It's just the next step. She reached for him. I'd rather lose you than lose my soul. He walked away. Mothers were separated from sons. Brothers turned against sisters. People who once worshipped together stood on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. Jesus whispered, this is why I told them to prepare before the choice is made for them. Then I saw those who had resisted. They were still in hiding, but their faith burned brighter than ever. I watched a child, barely 10, lift her hands in prayer. And heaven moved. In that hut, a family with no food watched as their empty table filled before their eyes. A sick man, unable to see a doctor, was healed the moment hands were laid on him. A storm tore through a city, but where the faithful lived, it stopped at the edge of their homes. The world had abandoned them, but heaven had not. Jesus turned to me, urgency in his voice. Tell them to prepare. I opened my mouth to speak, and suddenly the vision shifted again. This time, I saw the sky itself change. And in the distance, a sound began to rise. A sound that made the earth tremble. A trumpet. The final moment was coming. The sound of the trumpet shook the heavens. It wasn't like any sound I'd ever heard before. It wasn't just noise. It was a call. A final, undeniable call. And then I saw it. A great door in the sky. Massive, radiant, made of pure light. It stood open, but only slightly, slowly closing with each passing moment. People were running toward it. Some sprinted with everything they had, desperation in their eyes. They had finally realized the truth. But for some, it was too late. They reached the door just as it sealed shut. They pounded on it, screaming, begging, "Please, Lord, let us in." But the door did not open. Jesus stood beside me, his face full of sorrow, just as in the days of Noah. I looked back at the earth, my heart breaking. The world was still moving. People were still going about their lives, laughing, working, staring at their screens. They didn't hear the trumpet. They didn't see the door. They didn't know time had run out. And then I saw two groups of people. The first group, those who had prepared. They had strengthened their faith long before this moment came. Their hearts had been anchored in Jesus, unwavering. As the world fell apart, They stood untouched. Fear had no hold on them. The second group, those who had waited too long. They had assumed they would have more time. They had told themselves, "One day I'll get serious about my faith." But when the moment of decision came, they had nothing to stand on. I watched as fear consumed them. They screamed, they pleaded, but the time of decision had passed. Jesus turned to me, his voice heavy. "There will come a moment when the choice is permanent." I could hardly breathe. "What do I do?" I whispered. His eyes locked onto mine. "Tell them." Oh. And then, just like that, I was back. Gasping for air. Hospital lights blinding me, machines beeping, a nurse rushing over. "You were dead for almost 12 minutes, she said, shaking her head. "It's a miracle you're back." But I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about the door. I was thinking about the people pounding on it too late. I was thinking about the warning Jesus had given me. I tried telling a close friend. He laughed it off. "Probably just your brain playing tricks on you." Even my own wife hesitated. She saw my conviction, but she didn't know what to do with it. That's when I remembered Jesus' words. "Do not worry about who will listen. Your task is to share." So I'm sharing this now. March 2025 is coming. The world is changing. Don't wait until it's too late. I can't shake what I saw. I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, the vision still burned into my mind, the great door closing, the people screaming too late. I try to go back to normal life, but nothing feels the same. How can it? I look around and see the world already shifting, just like Jesus showed me. Technology advancing faster than anyone expected. Convenience replacing wisdom. Churches drifting into comfort instead of conviction. And worst of all, people aren't paying attention. I watch as they scroll on their phones, caught up in endless distractions. Arguments over politics, entertainment, temporary things, while eternity is at stake. Oh, I see Christians compromising, convincing themselves that little choices don't matter, that they'll have time to fix things later. But I saw the truth. Later is a lie. I remember what Jesus said. The enemy does not need to take their faith. He only needs to weaken it, little by little, until they no longer hear my voice. That's what haunts me the most. Not the disasters, not the global leader, not even the mark itself. The slow drift. The way people will walk into deception without even realizing it. I try to warn people, but their responses are always the same. You're overreacting. This is just how the world works. God wouldn't let something like that happen. I used to believe that too, but then I stood beside Jesus and watched it unfold with my own eyes. The deception isn't coming. It's already here. And the only ones who will see it are those who are anchored in Him before it's too late. Jesus didn't tell me to convince people. He told me to tell them. So that's what I'm doing. If you're reading this, please don't ignore it. Strengthen your faith now. Read the Word like your life depends on it. Because it does. Teach your children. Stay close to Jesus. Ask Him to open your eyes to the truth. Because when the moment comes, when the world says, just take it, just comply, it's nothing. You must already know your answer. I can't make the choice for you. But I can tell you this: the door is closing. And soon the choice will be permanent. Well, I don't know who will listen. I don't know how many will shrug this off, call it fear-mongering, or dismiss it as just another wild story. But I do know this: what I saw was real. Jesus wasn't trying to scare me. He was warning me so I could warn you. Because time is running out. Not in some distant, far-off future. Not in another generation. Now. March 2025 is approaching. The world is shifting exactly as he showed me. Step by step, people are walking into deception. Some willingly, some blindly. But you don't have to. Jesus told me, tell them to prepare now, before the choice is taken from them. So I'm telling you, choose now. Choose him before the world demands your allegiance. Choose truth before deception numbs you. Choose faith before fear forces your hand. Because once the door closes, it won't open again. And the last thing you ever want to hear is, I never knew you. The choice is yours, but you must make it now.